It is certainly a pleasure to be able to sit with you this morning, and I really, really look forward to having a high energy discussion on a topic that is so very relevant. I mean, today when I look out my window, I almost felt like I was driving through smog in St. Lucia with this persistent Saharan dust issue that we continue to face. Just one of many challenges as far as climate resilience, climate smart, and of course the impact, as we've been hearing so much about, of changes within our ozone and so on. So I think if ever there was a time that we need to be having a very focused discussion, it is now. So I'm really grateful that you were able to make the time to join us this morning. So if I may, one of the buzz phrases that is really catching on in the world of finance is responsible financing. It's the idea of embarking on projects that benefit society in a tangible way, that promote sustainability and resilience. In the Caribbean, we are a little bit late to table in terms of embracing this concept, with only one of our regional banks to date joining the global conversation on responsible banking. But given the disproportionate manner in which climate change affects our small territories, it is crucial that we begin to make appropriate and responsible banking part of our culture. This is thrown into even sharper relief when we consider that we are already in what is expected to be a very active Atlantic hurricane season. The time for change is now. In order to facilitate the transition, we are happy to play a small role, and hopefully a small but meaningful role, in educating our members as to the benefits and the opportunities that are part of and parcel of responsible banking. So without further ado this morning, I am so very honored to welcome Orville Gray, as well as Maria Eugene, representing the discussions on responsible financing. And of course, we will also be joined by a member partner, Ray Klein from Republic Bank. Maria is Latin American and Caribbean Network Coordinator for the United Nations Environment Programme's Finance Initiative, UNFFI. She has more than 15 years experience with the dissemination and consolidation of corporate social responsibility strategy in large companies, sustainable finance, and developing innovative projects with positive impacts. She worked for 11 years in the financial sector with different subjects: finance education and social entrepreneurship and environmental risks and opportunities, working directly with different business units, investments, credit, and insurance, as certainly one of the areas that we need to also consider as we move forward with our planning and discussions around insurance, and making sure that you are well informed in terms of what sorts of insurance you're looking at, the coverage, etc. Maria Eugenia is graduated in business administration at PUC, CAMP, PUC Camp, and she is currently studying a master's at USP with a focus on social impact. So Maria, without further ado, let me hand over to you. I will introduce Orville and Ray Klein at the next segment of this discussion. Thank you again, Maria, and welcome.
Many thanks, Wendy. It's a pleasure being with you. It's a great opportunity to have the discussion today. As you mentioned, it's very challenging, the time that we are facing, not just because of climate change, but also because of the COVID crisis. So it's very important to understand what's the role of the financial system in this moment. So just to make also a short introduction about UNFFI. UNFFI, it's the financial initiative of the Environmental Program for Environment of United Nations. And we work with banks, insurance, investors to promote sustainable issues. So I will share my screen and then I can show you my presentation. Just give me 1 minute. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. So for today, I prepared some slides to talk about what means responsible banking, what means the principles for responsible banking that we launched last 2 years ago, 1.5 years, I would say. And we really want to engage more and more financial institutions in this initiative. But as we were talking, I think we have a lot of challenges right now. Environmental risks, environmental damages, climate change is really running on the time. We can see all over the world regulations and self-regulation pushing companies, but it also pushing financial institutions. More and more we see responsible investors, including ESG, environmental, social, and governance in their decisions and how they manage their assets. So we see investors with a new mindset progressing in this direction. More and more intangible assets matters for the valuation of companies. And on the other side, we see new behaviors happening with the new generations that are coming, especially the younger ones with different drivers. And they will be in the future employees, suppliers, clients. So it's not only about the climate, but it's also what's the stakeholders that we are engaged. So when we look at these challenges, we really have to understand what's the role of the financial system and how to address this in an appropriate way that makes sense for banks, for insurance, and for investors. And I really like this image because we can see the role of the financial sector connecting the real economy, connecting how to flow financial resources for the SDGs, for environmental risks, for social issues. So we really have to see ourselves in the middle of this that figure that I'm showing you, and understand in one hand we have banks face risks, but on the other hand they face opportunities, and they have to take advantage of them. So as UNEP-FI, as United Nations, we launched some different principles, one for insurance, one for banks, another for investments, in some way to help financial institutions, to give them some guidance, to give them some support to achieve the SDGs, to achieve the Paris Agreement, and at the same time to reduce risks of your financial institutions, and then can see the opportunities that you can have. So these principles are really important frameworks we have all over the world. And today I will focus on the responsible banking, because I understand that's something that also it's important for the region. So why we have these principles? We launched it in 2019, as I mentioned before. We see that now in the past we have financial crisis, and the banking industry was in the center of this. And then we have to look at the social environmental challenges and understand what is the role and how to finance a sustainable future. And as I mentioned before, we have to look the new generation that are coming, not only as consumers, but also as our employees. And also we have like a world challenge that SDGs means for us, but also the Paris Agreement. So I think the main challenge of the principles is how financial institutions can align their core business with the challenges of our society, environmental and social. So that's why we launched the principles. We have the 6 principles. I will cover a little bit some of them, and trying to show you how to implement and how banks can address this in their day-by-day businesses. But the 6 principles, I think the most important is how to align the core business. So we are not talking about philanthropy. We are not talking about social projects. We are talking about products, services. So nowadays, we have 40% of the under management of banks around the world that joined the principles, and they are committed with the responsible banking. In the region, we have Republic Bank, very, very happy to have them on board because I think they also have an important role to motivate other financial institutions to getting board in this initiative. So first of all, this is also an invitation to everyone to participate and join the principles for responsible banking. So I think one of the most things that are important that I already mentioned is that we expect that banks align their core business with the SDGs, with the Paris Agreement, but also with national and regional frameworks, understanding what are the needs that you have in the Caribbean, and then you can set your strategy considering the needs of your country, of your region. Nowadays, I'm working with in Suriname, in Barbados, St. Vincent, Grenadina, and we are also implementing a project with the government and with other UN agencies in some way how to have an ecosystem that collaborate and enable this alignment that we are talking about. One important thing for us is that financial institutions can understand what are the positive and negative impacts of their portfolio and understand that it depends of their business model, and it also depends of the country needs. So when you identified where are your most important positive and negative impacts, you'll be able to set targets, at least choose targets for the most significant impacts, and then your bank can measure progress. So if it's climate an important issue, how to integrate climate risk in your portfolio, how to have credit lines for finance renewables or new green solutions. So this is the kind of thing we want to see. And we understand, as I mentioned before, it's not about philanthropy, it's not about operations. We are talking about your products and services. So how your products and services promote financial inclusions, promote and increase entrepreneur women in the region, financial health, financing new business models. On the other way, we also want to mitigate negative impact, so carbon emissions, deforestation risk, over debt, labor rights. So having all the time these two lenses in mind. To access positive and negative impact, we understand that you have to consider your business, your sectors that you are financing, and the countries that you have operation. And we also have a tool that can help financial institutions to understand where are the impacts, and then try to set targets. So significant areas would be important, aligning to SDGs and alignment with the Paris Agreement. Nowadays, we are launching different guidelines that can help financial institutions to set their targets. Nowadays, we have these three guidance. One, how we look the challenge of financial inclusion and financial health. And I know this is something important for the region. So how many people has banking account? How many people doesn't have banking account, and how to include them in the banking system? So again, this is an opportunity. How we look vulnerable groups for financial inclusion, how we look women for financial inclusion. So again, is a business opportunity that banks can address with this sustainability lens. We also have a guidance for gender, and we also have a guidance for climate, how to set targets for climate. Probably you're aware that we're going to have in the end of this year, the COP26, where we're going to, all around the world, countries, companies will discuss how we're going to achieve the Paris Agreement. And financial institutions around the world are committing for net zero to 2050. Republic Bank is also with us in this initiative. So understanding that we can align banks' portfolio, one, again, for reduced risks, and two, to take advantage of the opportunities that we're going to have with new technologies. And soon we're going to have other documents that will help banks how to set targets in biodiversity. I mean, deforestation risk, land use, and others, bioeconomy, and resource efficiency. So this is the kind of initiative we are promoting, and to support you in your journey. And I know that most of you maybe are in the beginning of this journey, and we believe that this kind of framework, this kind of materials can help you in this journey. For climate change, I think Wendy mentioned a few times about the challenge that we have for climate. And these are different materials that we have that can help you to understand what really means climate risk for banks. How do I include this kind of analysis in my credit analysis, in my portfolio analysis? So maybe in the future, we can have more and more conversations about this. We also have some trainings about this, but we are saying that we have two kind of main risk: physical risks, and then we are talking about natural disasters, I would say, and the other are transition risk. What I mean is we will have new technologies, we will have new regulation, we will have new consumer behaviors. So how we look this risk, how we evaluate this risk and integrate in the rating process of your financial institutions. So this is the kind of thing we should start doing. So these are these materials for this kind of risk. Here you can find a lot of examples that we have and around the world, and how to report this for public and other stakeholders. And as I mentioned, the climate cooperation, the COP26, we also have a lot of materials to support you, how you will look your portfolio and how you're gonna see what are the sectors that are more carbon intensive, and that you'd be able to set a path with your commercial department, with your risk department, and then to reduce the carbon emissions of your portfolio. So just to give you examples of what we provide and how we see that, what means a responsible banking. But nothing of this will be done without clients. So this is the principle number 3. And this is the business opportunity. I think banks are looking more and more synergy on working with customers and users, promote sustainable practices, and monitor how customers are making these transitions for more sustainable business technologies or lifestyles. So we see more and more clients and customers liking to work with banks on these directions. So the role of banks is to first raise awareness internally. So internally, bankers need to understand what are the challenges and what they can do, raise awareness of clients and the supply chain, develop new products and services to promote sustainable business models, and the last one, not the least, encourage more sustainable investments and choice. So this is how we see that. And for products, I think nowadays we have many options. So we see, sorry, they're here in Spanish. So commercial and corporate loans, credit lines for energy efficiency, for green building, for new kind of constructions for support corporates. We see carbon trades, we see advisory services and helping clients to these transitions, project finance, sustainable energy infrastructure, loans, and also including SMEs, and investment banking with especially green bonds sustainable bonds. So the idea is how you use the existing products that you already have, including this new lens of social, environmental, and governance in your day by day. And I think the green bonds are the most relevant nowadays. So there's something that if you still don't know much more about this, I really encourage that you understand what means a green bond and how when you issue a bond, a regular bond, how to include KPIs for social environmental issues. And there is many frameworks and third-party reviews that can help and give this framework. And then instead of issuing a bond, a regular one, depending of the project, you can label that as a green bond. And I know that in the Caribbean, you have a lot of opportunities for tourism, for fishing, for ports, for forests. So there are many opportunities that how green bond can fit your business lines. And of course, have new investors with also this kind of mindset. The number 5 is about governance and culture. So we talked that it's important to have clients on board. And again, it's important to have the executive committee, the board of directors, the employees on board with this new mindset. So when you start working as a responsible bank, you should look your governance, and that would enable and support the implementation of the principles, but the implementation of a sustainability strategy. What kind of a structure, policies, process can help you to manage social environmental risks, and how top management executives are responsible for leading. And we see now we are starting to working with the Caribbean, but I would say that in Latin America, we as a whole, we have really good examples that you also can inspire yourselves. How this kind of topic is taken to the board of directors of the executive committee. So that's something very important to the next steps. And every part of the bank in different levels and in different business units and support teams has a role. And so this is not a sustainability team task. This is the bank strategy to integrate this kind of issue that would be so important for the future, for having a competitive strategy for the future. And I won't read everything that we have in this chart, but in general, you can see what kind of expectation we can have with different internal publics that you could work with. And of course, this is not a one shot, it's a working in progress that you're going to engage everyone on that. And last and not least, transparency and accountability. So, you know, that is not only what we write, that we commit, but to show the progress. And in the principles, we understand that this is really a key part of the process. So we expect that all banks that are with us, they report the impact analysis, their baselines, their targets, what kind of plans they are doing. So this is very important, not only for UNEP-FI, this is for stakeholders to give this transparency of the importance of the topic for your company. We have a template and we will give to banks an annual feedback about its performance. So we really want to collaborate with every bank and support you in your journey. Then you can year after year improve your strategies and implement this, and really to have a triple bottom line in the end, not only the performance, the financial performance, but also the social and environmental. So our role in some way is to guide you in this direction. So this is some that I don't know if we're going to have questions, but this was in general what I wanted to show you. Here you can see my contacts. So if you want to know more about responsible banking, about what we are doing in the region, please reach me, and we can also have one-by-one conversation. And as I mentioned before, we have two projects in the region, one in Suriname, another in Barbados. It's Barbados, St. Vincent and Grenadine. This second is focused on blue economy, and the first in Suriname is in sustainable finance. So if your financial institution is in one of these countries, please, I also encourage you to reach me. We will be promoting surveys, capacity building, and we really will be pushing not only the working with financial institutions, but with the government to have a sustainable finance roadmap. And I'm really happy that I'm here with you at CAB, because I understand that you are also an important partner for us, because I understand that what we've been doing can be leverage for all the region, with other banking association, with financial institutions. And we really have, now that we are in this post-COVID, I hope we have soon the post-COVID, how finance and how investment can have this role of recovery, and to have a sustainable recovery, including this kind of thing, including this kind of lens. And I'm pretty sure that it will give more resilience, financial resilience, but also environmental resilience. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I can share these slides with you. I'm very happy to answer your questions and see how we can collaborate with you in the region.
Wonderful. Wonderful, Maria. Thank you so much. I think that was a very, very thought-provoking conversation to get us kick-started this morning. So I really want to thank you for that. And of course, as a banker, core banker in a previous life, the one question that comes to mind, and I'm sure that I will be very representative of our financial institutions in asking, is what do you see as the bottom line impact to the institutions who do move forward in this regard? And I say do because I'm very positive that coming out of these discussions, we will see people knocking on your doors. So be ready. What is the immediate impact that institutions can begin to face? One. And secondly, what is the impact and conversation likely to be with the customer in terms of these sorts of initiatives? Maria, over to you.
Thank you, Wendy. Yes, I think when banks start working with sustainable finance internally, I think there's a positive impact with employees. Employees are proud of working in organization with this kind of mindset. And the reputation, the positive reputation, it's very clear, seen in a short time. Another impact that I see, a positive impact, is with investors. As I mentioned before, I see more and more investors looking for ESG analysis, looking how your bank is managing environmental risk or managing financial risk. Are you prepared for this kind of challenges? So I would say in what I see around the world, and it's not only about reputation, we are talking about the capital cost for financial institutions. So financial institutions that has this kind of strategy embedded and consolidated, I'm pretty sure that they will have better financial costs. They will have access for credit lines with multilateral or with other investors. So I think the capital cost is something very good to have in mind. And then when you ask about clients, I think that's this kind of challenges, it's for everyone, not for banks. And sometimes clients, sometimes they don't know how we're going to move, how we're going to have money, how we're going to finance this transition. So it's an opportunity of a partnership with all of them. And what we see in Latin America and all over the world, I think the green bonds, the sustainability linked bonds are a very clear path to support your clients. I also see loans with tagging or not with the green issue, but having this direction, how to finance financial renewables energy, how to finance a green real estate. So clients are looking for this kind of approach, and having this kind of credit line could be very, very helpful. Not only credit line, but also advisory. And this is not only for clients, the same for customers. I think that we still have, and I would say in Latin America, a gap for financial inclusion. We still have thousands of people, millions of people, I would say, without a banking account. And sometimes they have a banking account, but they don't use effectively their banking account. So there is also an opportunity of having this kind of relationship with your clients and having more people on board and having the right products, the right services for their needs. So it's really a business opportunity in the end. I would like to say that. So it's not only about like saving the planet. I think we want that, but also it's about competitiveness. So how your bank will be prepared for the future and how you're going to work internally and externally to face these challenges.
Fantastic, fantastic. Maria, thank you so much for setting a running pace for the gentlemen who are about to come on and carry us into the next segment of the discussions. I hope that you are able to stay on the call, because I think that the questions that we have kind of, well, at least certainly floating in my head, will also include you as part of the overall discussions. So hopefully you can stay on with us this morning.
Oh, Wendy, unfortunately not. I have more 15 minutes. I'm really sorry, but I will stay for 15 minutes, but very happy for further discussions in the future.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think we had already agreed that this is a precursor to discussions that we will continue to have. So again, thank you for your time this morning in case you have to slip out as we continue.
Thank you, Wendy.
All right. Awesome. So we will continue our discussions this morning, and we are presently joined by Orville Gray, whom I introduced briefly earlier, and Ray Klein. So Orville is the coastal ecologist and climate change researcher by training. He holds a PhD in environmental biology from the University of the West Indies, Mona. Orville has over 20 years experience in the field of environmental impact assessments and environmental management in the Caribbean, and over 13 years experience in applied climate change. Orville is currently the regional manager for the Caribbean and Brazil at the Green Climate Fund. He has had several technical roles in climate change adaptation at national, regional, and international levels. He has also served as an adjunct lecturer at the University of the West Indies, Mona, Jamaica, in climate change and environmental management, and in environmental health at the Northern Caribbean University in Jamaica. Ray Klein is the group head of investment banking at Republic Bank, one of the leading capital markets and loans syndication groups in the Caribbean. In his role, Ray is also responsible for mergers, acquisitions, and debt capital markets and structured finance. More recently, he has been leading the sustainable finance initiatives for the group, emanating from its commitments to principles of responsible banking and net zero banking alliance. Previously, Ray was a vice president at Citigroup's private bank, where he structured alternative investment products for professional family offices. Before Citi, Ray worked with Morgan Stanley, where he ran a $13 billion alternative investment platform for high net worth clients to invest in private equity and real estate opportunities. Ray holds a Bachelor of Science and a Master's of Business Administration from Columbia University of New York. So undoubtedly, we are in exceptional hands this morning. I will turn over to you, gentlemen. I believe that Orville will kick off this segment for us. So Orville, welcome. Thank you again for being available to us. I don't know what time it is in your neck of the world, but welcome, and I hand over to you. Your mic is muted, so please unmute and we will kick off. Thank you. And Ray, again, thank you again for being with us.
Thank you, Wendy. It's my pleasure to be here. It was wonderful listening to Maria. I see quite a lot of parallels and indications of where we would like to see Caribbean support for climate finance going, especially with the conversation around the Republic Bank, which we are hoping to have even greater conversations with in coming days, as I'm sure Ray is also planning to do. With that, let me pull up my presentation. Let me know if you can see the screen.
Yes, visible.
Great. Let me just get it into presentation mode.
Mm-hmm.
All
There
right.
you go.
Great. All right. So this morning I'll be speaking a little bit about climate resilient financing, looking at a Caribbean context from the perspective of a climate financing institution, the Green Climate Fund. As mentioned before, I'm the regional manager for the Caribbean. So I'm currently supporting all the CARICOM member states, and we are happy to be on board supporting entities in the region that are also supporting these Caribbean countries, in addition to all the international accredited entities, such as UNEP that Maria represents. To give you just a brief input, and I'm focusing this presentation largely around the private sector and the support that we provide to the private sector. So looking at the Green Climate Fund, we do have a special facility or unit within the GCF dedicated to advancing the work with the private sector, and it's referred to as our private sector facility. I don't think we can get any simpler than that. What we have to bear in mind here is that in terms of the GCF and where it came from, it was established at COP16. This is the Conference of the Parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in 2010, following several rounds of negotiations in preceding years. Our government instrument was developed in 2011, our first board meeting in 2012. And as you can see, we've started quite a bit of work since then. Our first replenishment period we had, well, not replenishment, our first funding period was 2014, where we had $7.2 billion. And our first replenishment period was in 2020, USD $9.8 billion to GCF. We're looking at roughly 143 projects now under implementation, valuing over $6 billion, 106 under implementation, 99 accredited entities and 106 countries reached so far. So essentially, we are an operating entity of this UNFCCC financial mechanism, and the aim is to foster a paradigm shift towards a low emission and climate resilient development pathway in developing countries. So you can see the clear fit for our Caribbean countries. And in this context, we're unique in terms of how we look on the characteristics of the Caribbean by focusing, primarily on them from the perspective of them being small island developing states or SIDS. In terms of our private sector facility and what we do, we engage with the local and international private sector. Again, here the focus is on how can we support projects in countries looking at addressing the mitigation and adaptation elements that countries have prioritized. So we step in to try to act as a catalyst for high impact and transformative and innovative projects. We look to de-risk the delivery of private capital and scale up private sector investment. And we look to provide long-term funding through equity, debt guarantee, and grants as appropriate. Of course, we do structure our program looking at concessionality where necessary to achieve various results. I know you can imagine that the whole conversation around concessionality, especially when you start to think about things like loans, for instance, becomes a very difficult conversation with public sector entities, primarily in a government sphere. So the private sector and the support that they can provide is very significant, bearing in mind the large wealth that many of these entities are sitting on and not sure how to invest that sort of capital. So financial institutions play a key role in response to climate change. I know for a fact that many of our private sector entities have not been very much involved in the climate change discussion. They have been peripheral to the processes to date, and that has been one of the great challenges that we have faced in the Caribbean region. But as we can see from what is happening globally, is that the private sector is not going to escape the impacts of climate change. As a matter of fact, at the end of the day, they are likely to be, a sector that is predominantly impacted based on the different aspects of their process flows. And from that perspective, the private sector has to get on board, has to understand what climate change is about and figure out how they can play a role. And financial institutions in particular are no different. The banking sector of developing countries now account for over 50% of GDP. The institutions, again, they have the widest network and outreach and can support people at the bottom of the pyramid. The question is, how do we get them to provide and leverage those sort of funds to build resilience at that low level? There's roughly USD 23 trillion investment opportunity that exists in climate finance in emerging markets that needs to be financed. This is looking at, for instance, how do we tap into what is referred to as nationally determined contributions that countries have set forth in terms of their strategy to address climate change, what they've articulated to the UNFCCC. And looking at what is required to achieve these targets by 2030, which is considered to be a pivotal target period. So green bank loans need to grow from 7% to 30% by 2030 and provide the necessary debt financing that is important. And as you can see from the graphic here, looking at the climate smart investment potential between 2016 and 2030, you can see that there's a significant amount of money that is out there that needs to be tapped into. Some of this is held by countries. You can see that large figure for China, for instance. But even looking in our Latin American Caribbean region and what that means, there's quite a good chunk of climate smart investment potential there. And I think this again goes to what we heard in that first discussion with Maria. Now, how do we invest here at the GCF? We look at our various instruments: loans, equity, guarantees, grants. We look at how to de-risk the private capital for climate financing. So it's important for us, to look at, for instance, flexible pricing and relatively high risk tolerance. We want to be able to take on some of the risk that our private sector are worried about. So de-risk the climate smart investments, offset these risks and other impediments to climate finance by encouraging high impact climate investment, essentially acting as that market maker, that bridge that can then provide the leverage that the private sector needs to tailor the guarantee instruments that they are looking forward to and assume the equity positions that are necessary to continue to support investment in the region. We also look at how we can support the development of climate compatible financial systems and thereby ensure that, for instance, in the grant scheme, we're doing a fit for purpose procedure. I mean, there's a great consideration now as to, whether or not, and I'll be blunt, whether or not we're looking at, just continuing the status quo and essentially providing funds almost like a deposit into a savings account. We want to take it from there. We want these investments to be innovative, practical, real, but also to be able to leverage other investments that are out there in a real and tangible way to support the types of projects that are required for climate, for resilience building in our Caribbean region. Let's see what's happening here. All right. In terms of the portfolio and impact that the GCF is now leveraging, there are 34 projects that are coming out of our private sector facility space, totaling roughly 2.7 billion in GCF financing, but leveraging 8.3 billion in co-financing. And what this amounts to is 0.5 gigatons of carbon dioxide reductions and benefiting 46 million people. So it might not seem huge in the context of the number of projects or even in terms of, where we see GCF financing. But when you look at, for instance, even the number of beneficiaries so far, it's a significant chunk in terms of what we are trying to do to address that issue of climate resilience and a low carbon economy. So in our region, for instance, we have a lot of work happening in the Latin America and Caribbean space. Specifically in the Caribbean space, we have, for instance, NEFCO doing work in Haiti. We have CAF doing work in Latin America. There's space there for more to be done, and we're looking forward to bringing some new projects on stream within the course of this year, with our board meeting coming up in about 4 weeks. Then we, in terms of looking at the PPF, the PSF support to the Caribbean region, we have, for instance, projects like a green finance readiness. So the readiness program is one that, provides that foundation space by building the necessary capacity, looking at helping to develop the strategies and policies that are needed to support the sector. So, we have a green finance readiness that's in place that's looking at scaling up climate finance by transforming the financial sector and its intermediaries, mapping the climate finance needs, identifying barriers, exploring opportunities for FIs, and developing policy guidelines and regulations. Those are objectives that we have developed in these proposals and work with countries to support. And we have delivery partners that are supporting in this space through green banking networks such as IFC SBN, UNEP FI, GIZ, various central banks and local banking associations. And in terms of government stakeholders, they are very much on board in supporting this process through what we refer to as our nationally designated authorities, or NDAs, which are the primary focal point in conversing between developing countries and the GCF, as well as the financial regulators, the finance or economic ministries, and of course, the central bank. So as you can see, in terms of the stakeholder approach, in terms of the players that are involved, there's a good cohort there that we are trying to tap into to provide this necessary support. So for instance, there is a readiness project with through the Jamaica Stock Exchange looking at green bond listing. And in this, as I referred to, there are various components that are significant here. Component one is looking at assessing the debt market in terms of bonds and the infrastructure that's in place. Component two is providing guidance to develop the appropriate policies and guidelines. Component three is addressing the capacity building and market education. And four, issuance and development of a project concept of a green bond facility. So we're looking at, okay, how can we use readiness to put this foundation in place to then leverage into a larger project platform. So we really want this to be significant here. And in this context, the work is starting between Jamaica and Dominica, and we see where there's potential for this to go even wider. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of conversation now internally in GCF with other private sector stakeholders at the international level that's looking to see how they can either piggyback on or significantly scale up the work that will likely come out of this project. And I believe there's supposed to be a launch for this in the coming weeks, if it has not yet been scheduled. We also have what we refer to now as our funding proposals. These are really where countries get the large scale support. And we also, with this, provide what we refer to as PPF, project preparation facility, to provide additional funds to help to develop these funding proposals so that they can make their way through the processes in GCF and get approved by our board. And in this context, what we're looking at is providing the concessional funding and de-risking the financial instruments, as I mentioned, providing funds, grant funds available to develop a pipeline of green investments, guaranteeing the technical assistance to build the institution's capacity, and establishing these new green units. That's absolutely essential for us. And you can see from our delivery partners here, again, we're trying to bridge the gap in terms of the players that we've been working on. And in our space, for instance, entities like CAF, are vital to this sort of support. And the same set of government stakeholders, again, are expected to play a significant role. So in GCF, what do we look for? Because this is usually one of the big questions that we get asked. What do we look for? We look for additionality of GCF funding. Why is it that countries are looking to come to GCF for funding? So the projects must crowd in additional finance on top of GCF. So it's rare that you're going to see a private sector project coming to GCF looking exclusively for grant funding. We want to see that range of financial instruments being tapped into. We want to see that leveraging of what the GCF can provide. But we are a climate finance institution. So for us, there has to be a strong climate rationale behind these projects. So, what is the scientific evidence to support the projects from a climate science perspective? What are the climate impacts that need to be addressed? How are these, for instance, green bond markets or other financial mechanisms going to address a climate change challenge in the region? How are they, for instance, going to support the rollout of renewable energy mechanisms within the Caribbean? It must also take a country-driven approach, so alignment with nationally determined contributions, which are the climate change priorities that have been highlighted by countries. And each country must also supply what we refer to as a no objection letter. So the countries have what we refer to as country ownership. That's one of our core principles. The projects cannot come to the GCF without countries supporting them. There are 6 investment criteria that we focus on: impact potential, paradigm shift potential, sustainable development, recipient needs, country ownership, and efficiency and effectiveness. And these straddle across our 8 results area of energy, transport, building cities and industries, ecosystems, livelihoods of people and communities, health, food and water sector, forest and land use and infrastructure. So you can see it's a wide area that we provide support to, and this is structured across both adaptation and mitigation elements. And of course, the projects will have to be compliant with our GCF policies, just as how an investment would need to comply with an investment firm that they're looking to provide support, to get support from. And of course, completeness of documentation is key to be able to get these in a shape ready to be presented to our board to be able to be approved. So this is very significant for us. So I mentioned, for instance, funding proposal, and we can look, for instance, at one of the stuff that's been done in the region in terms of the Haiti project with NEFCO, which is a smart solar energy access microgrids project. And in that process, they're looking at providing clean, affordable, and reliable energy in the southern rural Haiti. So you can imagine bringing this to a group of communities that are significantly challenged from an energy perspective in a LDC country. This is the only one in the Western Hemisphere. So it's a very challenged country, and I'm sure we all know that the dynamics happening in Haiti. So it's using subordinate loans to develop 22 community scale solar and battery storage microgrids, and also providing technical assistance to the local business sector. And here, as you can see, an estimated emission reduction of 214 million carbon dioxide equivalent. This is significant. I mean, benefiting 300,000 project beneficiaries in Haiti, based on the context that we know they are in and the challenges that they have, is a very significant project for us. Of course, the size of this project is just under USD 10 million, but there is significant scope for this to be scaled up into a much larger project, depending on the outcomes of the implementation. Then we have, for instance, work that's currently underway, seeking approval, looking at transforming finance to unlock climate action in the Caribbean through CDB, where they're looking towards lending program through a national development banks, local financial institutions for mitigation and adaptation investments, providing technical assistance to NDBs, LFIs, and MSMEs, which is significant, and tapping into that PPF grant to be able to address the feasibility studies, looking at the country needs and technologies, and the the appropriate concessionality that needs to be structured for the funding project to be able to be presented to our board in a manner that we can approve. So this is something that is underway, and we see great potential here to unlock more climate action in the Caribbean. So in terms of accessing GCF support, which is normally the next set of questions that comes to us, is, you know, there's significant work here. And as I mentioned before, we engage through what we refer to as accredited entities. So these are entities that have gone through an accreditation process with the GCF and therefore have a relationship with us to implement projects. But again, as I mentioned before, this has to be done in collaboration with our NDAs. So AEs and NDAs will work together to develop proposals in line with what we refer to as an entity work program and a country program. A country program is designed around the priorities of a country based on stakeholder input to say that these are the priorities for adaptation and mitigation in the country. And the entity work program usually is where an entity such as, for instance, CDB will give an indication of which countries they're supporting on what projects and what their entire pipeline looks like. So we want to be able to understand that from the two contexts, how the work is being done to ensure that what the entities bringing forward in their entity work program is also collaboratively supported in a country program, so that we can understand that there is country ownership there and there's significant collaboration underway in supporting these projects. So we do also discuss with our NDAs how to use readiness to increase private sector engagement. And I think this is one of the areas that, based on some of the conversations we had in our 2021 virtual dialogue in March in the region, this was one of the areas that we highlighted as being a significant area for the region to tap into. How to get countries to provide support to the private sector to get them to build the necessary foundation that's required to tap into the GCF for additional funding. And one of those programs is to identify a few of these entities that can potentially go through the accreditation process and therefore put themselves in a position to take climate change projects on board for Caribbean countries. And how we work, again, as I mentioned, it's through our accredited entities and our programs and projects. This is a relationship that we have fostered to date. And what we have here on this slide is essentially, as you know, just a small picture of the private sector entities that are accredited to the GCF. And this is where I'm hoping to be able to see Caribbean players, you know, being able to put their logos here. I'm looking, for instance, a Republic Bank to be well recognized here and taking on a pipeline of projects for Caribbean countries, or even National Commercial Bank in Jamaica, or, you know, other private sector entities, you know, Williams Capital. There's so many that do have the potential to come into this space and provide this support. And one of the things that we want to do is understand the challenges that they're facing, see how we can help them to have that dialogue with countries in the region, get nominated, and become accredited to then take a pipeline of private sector projects forward that the region can significantly benefit from. I trust that this has been helpful in terms of giving an oversight of the GCF, what we do, and how we can support the region. Thank you.
Absolutely, Orville. Thank you so much for that walkthrough. It certainly has provided quite a bit of context in terms of what you do. You may have already gone into the how, but I think you ended on a point that I'm really interested in exploring a little bit more with you, and that is specifically as it relates to becoming an accredited partner, right? But I'll come back to you on that one. I want to go across to Ray. I don't want Ray to feel that he's been left out for so long. Hi again, Ray.
Good morning, Wendy. How are you doing?
Good morning. Good morning. Wonderful. So firstly, let me again welcome you, and certainly welcome you in the capacity of being the only Caribbean related bank or associated institution that has actually begun this very, very critical conversation. So I'm just going to go through a few questions with you, Ray, to help the members who will be listening into this program understand what drove you to the conversation and what you have seen as reaping benefits so far, if any. and what that whole process has been like. So perhaps I will allow you to kick us off, and then we will start a little conversation.
Sure. Well, again, thank you for the invitation, Wendy. To obviously to Orville and to Maria. I hope to continue the discussion with you guys around several sustainability initiatives. I think I have a call scheduled with Orville at 9 p.m. That is so within the next week to kind of talk through some some next steps. But for Republic Bank, I mean, just to give you some background, our journey is a natural evolution of, I think, who we are as an institution. Our DNA has always been ingrained in the communities that we serve. And I think at this critical juncture in our evolution, as we kind of look outward and we look to kind of expand our footprint. One of the things that we uncovered in many of the forums, the dialogues that we were having, was that the Caribbean was somewhat underrepresented in forums with global policymakers. Even though our region, when you actually look at it, is very susceptible to a lot of the effects that come from things like natural disasters. You look at the events over the last year in terms of the global pandemic, it has disproportionately affected our region more than anything else, given our dependence on tourism. So we thought that, as one of the leading financial institutions in the region, it was a natural extension of the sustainability, our corporate responsibility, to really drive a lot of these initiatives, I think, at a national level, take the discourse, I think, to a national level, and to some extent, take it even higher than that, take it on a regional level, and take it really on a global scale. So when we looked around, we saw a couple initiatives that were aligned with financial institutions, key of which was the Principles for Responsible Banking, which is being driven by United Nations Environmental Finance Initiative. We thought that aligned perfectly with us because it in a sense, it kind of merged the national development strategies with the sustainable initiatives that the UN was putting out in terms of their 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So we thought that one was the most impactful to the region. And we uncovered that again, underrepresentation in the Caribbean. There was no other Caribbean institution there, so we felt it was important for us as the largest financial services group in the region to really take a seat at that table and raise our hands and really bring to bear at that forum a lot of issues that impact our region. For us, it's been a very, very interesting and pleasurable experience. We have had a series of discussions with multiple stakeholders, including yourselves at CAB, around different areas in terms of how we can help promote the development goals of our operating countries, but more importantly, how we can bring other players, other financial services players to these initiatives. So part of this is really to kind of let them know that it may seem like a laundry list of things that you actually have to do, but our experience has been that it's really been driven by the organizations themselves. So it's not something to be fearful of in terms of a commitment, because ultimately every organization, every financial organization has to eventually get there. And I think it's better if you can dictate your path rather than it to be forced on you by your regulators. So that's, for us, we made the commitment in September of 2020. We, along with 200 other peer global banks, became, are part of this Principles for Responsible Banking, this global commitment. But since that time, we are a founding member of the Net Zero Banking Alliance, alongside the likes of Citi, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, you know, a lot of the much larger systemically important banks. But again, bringing representation to the region, we were the only Caribbean bank, and more importantly, we felt that we wore that badge with some sense of pride, given the fact that, you know, the ultimate goal of the Net Zero Banking Alliance really has a significant impact on our region more than anything else. So I'd like to stop there and just see if there's, you know, are there any specific questions I could respond to in terms of our experience so far.
Sure, absolutely. That is a great intro, Ray. So the next question for me is, what has that process really looked like for you? And have you been able to identify the value add?
Yeah.
What has been the benefit of having begun the conversation?
Yeah, so the process for us really started with, I think, obviously our CEO. It has to be driven from the top down. So our CEO bought into it. He felt that it was something that would position our bank on a sustainable path to really outlive our generation, himself and and even me and maybe my kids. So for us, it started with buy-in from our executives around the process, which then became much, as you could appreciate, Wendy, in your role, it's a lot easier to kind of drive change internally in an organization if you do have executive buy-in. So from that standpoint, it then led to what are the steps we need to take to do this, because I think one of the things we wanted to avoid in terms of signing on was this whole analysis paralysis, where we look at the checklist and then we become kind of, you know, intimidated by it, and then we did a whole bunch of analysis on what it meant, what the impact was, and then, you know, months would go by and we won't sign anything. So I think the first bold step was, let's sign it and then let's figure out what we need to do. And I think that has been an eye-opening experience, in the sense that what we uncovered was a lot of the banks that are signatories to PRB are essentially going through the process just like us. They know their North Star, which is, we know we have to get there, but they're going to go through this process along the way, along with a group of banks, global in nature. So you do feel like you're being adequately supported. And I will tip my hat to the United Nations team. They've been instrumental, you know, so important. They've guided us every step along the way. I mean, Maria has dropped, you know, everything. You know, if I have a question, she'll call me on a Sunday, you know, because I'm preparing something to go to my board. So the support team is just so phenomenal that you don't ever feel like you're in this, you know, by yourself. So for us, the process has been, you know, phenomenal, and I would really encourage a lot of our sister or a lot of peer institutions across the Caribbean to really take a look at this, because directionally, this is really where our Caribbean, and we'll have numbers once we have. I think we'll have strength in numbers once we have more banks signing on to this, especially, you know, like, I'll throw the gauntlet down to NCB. They're, you know, they're the other big fish in the pond. You know, we shouldn't be out here by ourselves. It should be us and NCB kind of really championing the region, because between us, we really cover the breadth and length of the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, for me, the experience has been phenomenal. I would say that we're well supported. And I don't think that there's any aspect of this that any organization, whether they're big or whether they're, you know, they're small, they're an indigenous bank, they need to be fearful of.
Great, fantastic. You actually kind of jumped into my next question. So I think you've kind of addressed that even before I asked it, which was really to make a sales pitch to say to our member banks and to any financial services industry or entity who wants to get involved, why should I, right? Why should I make the bold step? Tell us a little bit about the timelines of this project for you. How long did it take from the, you know, concept of becoming part of the conversation to actually seeing it materializing? What has that process been like, the length of it?
Sure. So we started started the process, I think, in the middle of August, and by September we had signed on to the commitment. It's not to say that we didn't. There was some groundwork that was being done internally on our side even before that to really understand some of the implications. But I think, like I said, at a certain point, and if you know Nigel, you know he's kind of like that. It's like, all right, well, we have to make a decision. We can't just continue perpetually keep analyzing this. And I think,
Right.
you know, one of the important steps for, I think, for any of my Caribbean peer banks is have the discussion with the United Nations team, because it will be instrumental in helping you really, to me, dispel a lot of the stigmas, concerns that you may have. That was a key thing that we actually put in place. So from the moment of, I think from signing, which is in September, to the process of the portfolio impact, which we had to do, there's actually a tool that allows you to do that, to us setting our targets and our goals, to the fact that we presented to our board and we got sign off, to now that we're going to actually implement a lot of these initiatives into our business goals, into our you know, our budgets. That process has been, you know, roughly around 6 months, and it's still ongoing in the sense that now we have to think about training. Now we have to think about consulting. We actually have to think about reporting, which is the next big milestone for us. But it took about 6 months, you know, from soup to nuts. That's not to say that it will take 6 months for other organizations, because we, as you can understand, we're in 15 jurisdictions. So that also entailed us going to our jurisdictions and saying, you need to go get this from a governance level passed through your board. So all in all, it was quite a short process if you really look at it. And I think we're starting to see the benefits of that, in the sense that a lot of our, you know, the discussions that we're having, not only at the executive level, but also at the staff level around their engagement. We found that a lot of our customers are engaged along these topics, but more importantly, a lot of our staff are very much engaged in terms of aligning the bank to a lot of what we consider to be ESG type themes. And we're starting to see that coming out in, you know, a lot of the initiatives that they're putting forward to the executive team to see if these things can now be part of our fabric.
Fantastic. Okay, great. So Orville, welcome back to the conversation. I think that we have left you out a little bit for a while as we explored with Ray. And perhaps the next few questions can be addressed jointly between the two of you. And Orville, I'll kick off with you. What do you think we need to do, or what do you think we can do to get entities to take that bold step, to recognize the significance of their role in this whole climate resilience conversation?
I mean, that's there's a simple way to answer that, and there's a hard way to answer that.
Let's take the long route, shall we?
But yeah, I mean, our entities need to understand, when we talk about climate change and impacts in the region, and from an economic perspective, what does that mean? I mean, I think they understand the dollars and where that goes, you know. So for instance, the insurance sector, they know what it's like to pay out in an emergency after a disaster. They know that, you know, those who are able to afford it are going to come to them for a payout. You know, the insurance sector is probably one of the few sectors that really gets it. Our banks are probably just not there yet, and you know, there's an understanding that we need to capture there. Our banks, for instance, are the ones providing significant financial capital in, for instance, housing infrastructure, or you know, they're the ones that are now looking to tap into the renewable energy market and provide support for a lot of these solar farms, for instance, that are being developed. These are green technology, and there's a significant role here for banks to play. Now, even despite that, looking at, for instance, COVID-19 challenges, looking at the fact that the Caribbean is, as you mentioned at the very beginning, we are smack in the middle of Hurricane Alley. We can't take up our islands and move when a hurricane is coming. We have no choice. We're very small. We may have robust markets, but our markets are volatile, you know, depending on what happens. So they have to recognize that at some point, the impact is going to be significant for them, and therefore look to see how they can, you know, support that bottom line that they have. But the banks in the region also sit on quite a bit of wealth, and I think they are somewhat not clear on how they can leverage what they have with other sources of financing into the green architecture that's developing globally. And one of the biggest fears that I have is that if our region doesn't get it right and get it soon, is that there'll be more international players coming into the region and benefiting from that. And I think that's a real challenge that we see. I mean, I see significant potential for Republic Bank or NCB or similar institutions to, if they're not able to do it on their own, to partner with others. But they need to come on board now and understand that governments alone will not be able to support what is required, bearing in mind the climate challenges that our countries are facing. And just look even just within their own plants and their clientele to see where they want to go. And I mean, there's another very important area that is opening, which is green transportation. You know, that's a very viable market for the region. It's significant in Latin America, and there's a lot of work going on there. But I think we're in a very critical stage where we can actually lead on a lot of that with partnership, and we need to figure out how we can play that role and step into support. And if we can, for instance, identify one or two of these entities in the region, have these conversations with countries and get a nomination in to get through the accreditation process, then I think we could see a significant turnaround. And as Ray said, and as you had alluded to, you know, making that case for others to come on board, saying, okay, well, Republic Bank is interested, they're going to do this, and they've done it. If Republic Bank can do it, then others can do it, you know. Or if they don't want to do it on their own, how can we pull together as partners to make this happen and make this truly a native resource that our countries can tap into? Because Caribbean people, we like to use our own. You know, we don't like to step outside, but we have to make the case for why we should use our own. And I think this is a very you know, vibrant space for us to really maximize on that. And I'm looking forward to the conversations with Ray in the coming weeks.
Okay, Ray, is there anything you would want to add on to that? I certainly want to pick up on a point made by Orville, and that is our tourism dependence and the immediate impacts that we see when we have these sorts of events that are certainly becoming a lot more regular and a lot more devastating if we were to track over the last few years. So Ray, before I jump into that, Orville, you've been given a bit of a heads up as to what's coming. Go ahead, Ray, if there's anything else.
No, I mean, I would just kind of embellish on Orville's point. I think one aspect of it is the regulations. I think our regulators are somewhat more conservative, I find, in the current infrastructure. And I think we need to relax that a little bit, or at least support some of these organizations that want to make the push. You know, I do think that the current legislation, how it's written for what banks can and cannot do in this space, does kind of prohibit us, because at the end of the day, we do have a big bad regulator breathing down our neck. So it's only so much, you know, our passion, our commitment can only go so far if your regulators are not equally in support of you. So I do think that they are a very important part of that conversation.
Excellent, excellent. That would have been my next question. Gentlemen, you have my head in a complete tizzy, but it certainly speaks to the fact that this is a conversation that we cannot begin to have and drop the ball. So Nigel at Republic, who said, you know, we can't keep going over this and over analyzing it. This is certainly taking root as we have this dialogue. So certainly I do want to speak a little bit about the challenges that you would have faced from a regulatory perspective, or what some of the hiccups would have been and what you think could be the answer to those who will come after you. And like I said, I imagine there will be people knocking on your doors, Orville. in terms of, what does a roadmap to accreditation look like? And if there is one that exists, that's a whole nother conversation. Clearly, I can have you on here with me all day, but let's try to keep my thoughts in check. In the region, we are heavily tourism dependent, and certainly manufacturing as well. So just saying that alone gives an indication, or should paint a picture of some of the challenges that we are likely to face if we are not taking the steps to preparation. But do you believe that we need to have a broader conversation on sustainability before banks can really play a significant role? So to some extent, Ray, I believe that this also addresses the whole question of regulatory requirements and support. But Orville, can you go ahead with that one?
Yeah, I mean, we like to take baby steps in the region, and we like to, ensure that we check off A before we get to C. But I dare say that where we are now and the climate emergency that we're facing, I don't think that the old status quo will be able to sustain us going forward. I think we're going to get left behind, and we're going to find ourselves not having the type of resilience that we need, especially in the private sector space. So I think we'll have to do quite a lot of stuff now on the run and in parallel. It might be a tough learning curve for some, but I think everyone pulls each other along, and I think there's a possibility there, as Ray mentioned. And I do understand the challenge that's going to be faced in terms of the regulators, the existing legislations that are in place, and that's why, for instance, we say we have the Readiness and Preparatory Support Program, which a lot of countries tap into to build their capacity, strengthen their strategies, etc. But from a private sector perspective, and if the private sector can, even push on their side to get governments to understand the role that they could play, then we could see, for instance, leveraging technical assistance to build, to look at, for instance, those regulations, those legislations that need to be in place to support this kind of industry or these kind of actions. What we need to look at in terms of credit risk assessments, what needs to be in place to support new green financial products. We're tapping into, for instance, green bonds on the stock exchange, and we're starting with the Jamaica Stock Exchange. But how can we then, in parallel, get this going, for instance, in Trinidad? Not waiting to see fully, what develops out of the Jamaican space, but looking at what has been developed in other spaces and say, this is what is likely to happen in Jamaica. So we need to be on the ball now and start, making the steps, and potentially, for instance, having the conversations with the governments of Trinidad or other countries in the region to say, let us now examine the role of the regulators. Let's look at the legislations in place. Let's strategize how to do this. We can't, for instance, and you're kind of going there, we can't rely solely on the tourism product anymore to drive economies in the Caribbean. I mean, if you look at, for instance, just what COVID has done, and the reality that with climate change, the potential for similar pandemics is real. The question is, how do we, make our economies more robust? We've been saying that for the last 20, 30 years, but I think we're at a point now where we need to know, take some steps, take some risk. And that's one of the roles that GCF can play. Where the private sector is worried about risk, how can the GCF come in and offset some of those risks? What role can we play? Let's have those conversations now and see how we can step in. And as I mentioned before, if it is that we need to get a private, international private sector player to play an early role while we develop the systems in the region, then maybe that's what we need to do, just so that we can move this ball along and look to really see what we can do as quickly as possible, bearing in mind the NDCs and the targets for 2030. We can't wait for 2050. It's just not a viable outcome for the region.
Okay, and Ray, what says thou?
Sure. So I definitely think that we actually, as part of this exercise, one of the things that we want to do is promote more what we consider to be sustainable industries. So when we look at tourism, we have no issues with tourism and what it represents to our island states. but we need to look at the value chain and see whether or not some of that could be localized, right? Because we think that by having it localized, it stimulates more economic activities for the countries. It places more, I think, more entrepreneurs into the ecosystem. It brings more diversity. So, for example, some industries in like arts and craft or entertainment might have, you know, kind of a nice gender mix to them, as opposed to some industries that maybe just, you know, either male dominated and things like that, just historically. So we're looking at things like what we're calling sustainable tourism, right? So rather than having this all-inclusive experience where essentially tourists come off of a cruise ship or they fly into the country and they're kind of whisked away into this, you know, exclusive resort and everything is kind of imported. We're trying to see, all right, how do we actually make representation to have that experience be a lot more local, all right? And then we're looking at the, you know, the supply. So how do we now make agriculture more sustainable? Because a lot of what we bring in comes from the US. So how do we actually promote some of that? How do we, you know, we're looking at, you know, financing greenhouse plants, for example, because traditional agriculture does come with some elements that our regulators are overly concerned about. And then from a construction standpoint, then we're looking at how do we make sure that our construction industry is safeguarding us against essentially some of the challenges that may come in, you know, natural disasters, things like that, and making sure that what we consider to be our entire, you know, our entire ecosystem in the Caribbean, you know, from those islands that are highly dependent on tourism to the ones that may be more, you know, manufacturing based or more financial services based, how do we actually embed resiliency and make them a lot more sustainable? So a lot of it is going to be, we're going to use the capital. We have a lot of capital swimming in the Caribbean. We're going to use some of that capital, some of that cheap capital, and we're going to see how we can incentivize behavior so that potentially you can have this aspect now of entrepreneurs looking at sectors that traditionally may not have been what you know, what they would have typically would have gone into in years prior, and looking at those as possibly means of really starting businesses. So that's how we're thinking about really the entire ecosystem.
If I may, Wendy, just to piggyback on what Ray had mentioned, this whole aspect of the value chain and supply chain, it's critical. As you said, the tourism product is something that we're known for. Where we're located, our geography, you know, it's what we're known for and what we can sell. It's ours. So that's not going to change anytime soon. But I do recognize the connections that you made, for instance, to agriculture, and that's a very significant one. We import a lot in the Caribbean, and the question is, how can we, especially looking at what COVID did for us and the blocks to supply chains during this period, how can we revitalize and re-energize the agricultural sector to provide more to maybe not just our local industries in country, but regionally? How can we, you know, develop agriculture in a regional context that really supports regional tourism? Entertainment, I think I saw a press release out of Jamaica that suggested that during COVID, for the first half of this year so far, the tourism industry benefited somewhere in the region of $500 million Jamaican dollars. I mean, that's a significant pool of funds that one sector has benefited from during this COVID pandemic in a very short space of time. So they have adapted to some extent, and that's been linked to the tourism product to a great extent, because in most of our countries, we've been hammered by restrictions on movement, but in the tourism sector, we've created space for them. Then you talk about things like niche marketing and getting those entrepreneurs out there and making a living and sustaining our economies. In this pandemic, there have been a lot of success stories at the small level. So again, how can the private sector leverage that space and build it out in a real and impactful way? And then, you know, greening industry, you know, things like, for instance, if we're going to change minds, if we're going to change behaviors, then we need industry to come on board. So things like, for instance, the cement industry. That's one of the biggest talking points in recent times. How can we green cement? Because of course, cement uses a lot of, energy, and it puts out a lot of carbon dioxide, which is one of the negative impacts. How can we support the process to get our industries to go green? And this is another place that we can see the private sector investment playing a significant role. So I think there are a lot of good entry points there, and it's for us to figure out how we can then, looking at the climate lens, looking at climate finance institutions like the GCF, and figuring out where the nexus is and how we can significantly leverage that into significant projects in the region. I know UNEP, for instance, is doing e-mobility in the region, similar to what they did in Latin America. How can we piggyback on that and take it even more mainstream? Thanks.
Excellent. Really very good talking points. So I'm going to cushion what may be an uncomfortable discussion, but certainly another one that I think we need to stay on top of. And that is, how does the banking sector support the small and mid-sized entrepreneur? Because as we speak, what I hear is room for tremendous and possibly groundbreaking innovation and creativity by the public sector. There are certainly tremendous avenues for new businesses to sprout up based on what we're saying. But then the normal cry is that the banks are not supportive of upcoming businesses. So Ray, I am so sorry to shine this spotlight on you, but I think it's one that we need to begin to look at as well as we have these ongoing conversations.
Yes, and it's one that we actually, we have to do introspection as well. We in order for us to achieve our targets, we will need to essentially create this this next tier of businesses, like small, medium-sized businesses, and really have them be robust, resilient businesses. One of the ways that we're thinking about doing it, Wendy, is simply this: we're looking at essentially our existing risk policies, how we think about credit adjudication for that particular segment, and seeing how we can align that better to support a lot of the things. So a classic example is a small to medium-sized business comes into a bank. They don't have the collaterals to support the lendings that they may require. So, but I hate to keep beating up on the regulators, but on the one side, you have the regulators saying that you're an asset-based lender. You need to basically have everything secured. So there are limits to what we can do from an unsecured basis. What we're trying to see is how we can essentially carve out portions of our capital to allow us to lend more into this segment, albeit on an unsecured basis, but with data. So what we're going to use is we're going to use data to see how we can better predict good businesses, how we can better predict businesses that are essentially, maybe going into areas that we have a better sense of how they will perform based on the information that they bring to us. And then to complement that, what we're also looking at doing is we're actually looking at what's called kind of a incubator program. So essentially, we're going to pull clients that we think, if we put them through a structured program, which allows them to learn the aspects of financial reporting, learn what the banks look for. We think that by actually giving them that, and that's going to be free of cost, that's on us, that by giving them those tools, the probability for them succeeding is actually going to improve. So yes, you're still going to have 10%, you're going to have some element of businesses that are going to fail, but that's and the Caribbean has to wake up to that. I know in the Caribbean, we don't like this story of failures, but in the US, you wear that as a badge of honor. And in many developed markets, they're like, oh yeah, like I started 3 businesses and I failed like 3 of them, but I'm still gonna go again. And people actually it's refreshing in the US. In the Caribbean, you're a pariah if you fail. So there's this aspect that we have to have, as our former chairman, Mr. Harford, would say, we'd have to have some some belly, we have to have long belly, in the sense that we have to stomach that there's going to be some losses that come, in certain sectors, because they're evolving, they're emerging sectors. But we do think by actually embedding businesses with good, what we consider to be kind of good training, it will actually improve their likelihood of succeeding. And then also for us introspectively to look at how we adjudicate credit. So I think the combination of those two are actually going to allow us to then really meet some of the goals that we have in the SME sector. And we're specifically targeting that sector. So in every single jurisdiction that we're in, we're actually targeting lending into that sector, with heavy targets, not things that are just cute to look at. These are going to be things that are going to be, I think, monumental when you look at a conservative bank like Republic Bank. So it's us actually now putting our money where our mouth is, and not just kind of giving lip service to this particular segment, which is a very important fabric to the financial ecosystem.
Absolutely. And I think that, again, if ever there was a time where we could say that something good has come out of, what could have been an unpleasant situation, it's really that the pandemic has brought to light the fact that we do need to be diversifying and we do need to be testing as we go. So to your point about failing, failure is only if you go down and stay down, in my mind. But I think that the natural inclination is that we will continue to push forward and find ways of doing things that otherwise would have seemed like a failure, right? So we take those learnings and we keep moving forward. Now, in terms of the education, while climate finance and sustainable financing and climate resilience are not new conversations, I think that they have taken on a whole new meaning in our region and in our context. So in terms of educating not only the masses, but certainly the financial institutions as well, who bears the brunt of that responsibility? Orville, would that be international organizations like you? Is it the regulators? Who really should these messages be coming from?
That's a tough one. The brunt has been on governments. To be honest, that's really where it's been. I mean, governments are the ones that go to the UNFCCC. They're the ones that sit down at the negotiating table primarily to drive the conversations about what needs to be done and how we're going to do it. In terms of articulating their nationally determined contributions, this is government-led. So, government has to play a significant role. If government is going to put targets in place that's going to impact on the private sector, then government has to pull the private sector to the table. They have to bring the private sector in, not just to bring awareness to the sector, but also to get them to be an integral part of the various mechanisms that are at play, so that they can provide their voice on the plans that are being made and the targets that are being set. Because the biggest concern would be that we have NDCs that our private sectors are not aware of, do not understand, and therefore we fail to achieve these targets simply because a valuable sector is just not on board with what needs to be done. So unfortunately, the governments bear the brunt of that, but the GCF, we're trying our best to find that space and have those conversations and bring awareness, bring technical support to the private sector in the various regions. The Caribbean is a valuable region for us, so we're looking to see how we can have those conversations in the space. We really want to incubate the private sector there where climate finance is concerned. We want to see them tapping into the GCF resources in a real and dynamic way. So we are looking to see what role we can play as an international organization in bringing awareness and getting them to a position where they can act regardless of what is happening in other spheres.
Okay, thank you for that, Orville. I think that we're beginning to wrap down towards the last few minutes of our time together. But there is one very important question. We spoke a little bit about the innovation and the capacity building that can come out of these sorts of initiatives. For our customers, though, what are the ultimate benefits of the banks undergoing these strategic changes? Do we see new products emanating in market? Do we see reductions? What are the ultimate benefits that are likely to be accrued by Joe Public?
Yeah, I mean, if I could take that one, I would say there's a couple things. I definitely think you will see more products and services being pushed into the market. So a plug here for our Encash app, that we launched. It is a direct link to our sustainability efforts. So how do we actually think about financial access for every segment of our population? And so it becomes, how do we actually bring innovation to bring some of these ideas into the public, really to kind of distribute to our broad customer segment. So that's one aspect in terms of what we will see. In terms of your traditional lendings, so what you'll find is that we will look at maybe more additional add-ons. So for example, like the average homeowner, one of the things that we're thinking about introducing into that segment, and there is some segments of the market that already have this, is how do we actually layer in insurance products on top of your mortgage, so that in the event of an unforeseen natural disaster, that you're not left with any question around whether or not you have the adequate protection in place. And that's even for segments that may not necessarily be able to afford it. So we're going to try to make it affordable from the standpoint of either offsetting what you typically would pay in terms of your mortgage, so it becomes almost neutral to you whether or not you have it or not. So there are a lot of things that we're thinking about. How do we actually embed that resiliency into our every single segment that we have, into our retail segment, into our SME, our commercial segment. A lot of the benefits disproportionately will tend to weigh into the corporate and kind of large customer segment, given the size and the scale. A lot of this is going to be infrastructure. A lot of it is going to be really how do we actually, bring about change in terms of industry. So it will tend to skew towards the corporate, but you will see I think a lot of tangible evidence in the retail consumer segment as well, similar to the ones that I mentioned just now.
Okay, this has certainly been a very invigorating discussion, exactly as I had hoped it would go, with quite a few takeaways, and still I think there is a lot more opportunity to continue to explore the potential. And I think this has a potential to be huge, not only for the banking sector, but certainly for the public, in terms of new avenues of doing business and how do we maintain a level of profitability and economic viability. Gentlemen, before we wrap up, Orville, perhaps I will allow you a few minutes just to give any closing remarks, thoughts, or feelings that you may have in this regard.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to have this conversation. To be honest, I mean, talking about climate finance in the context of the private sector does take me way out on the edge of my area of expertise. But I'm happy to learn. I'm happy to have these conversations to better understand what the region needs. And we're looking forward to players in the market, even coming directly to us at GCF. I mean, we're open to having these conversations, while at some point the conversation will need to be with the governments in terms of moving things forward. The GCF is there, and we're happy to engage initially and provide that convening power that we could bring to the table, similar to what we did at our dialogue in the region. So I'm looking forward to, as I mentioned, that first conversation with Ray and the team at Republic Bank. And we're hoping that that conversation will be so dynamic that it energizes the team to really get involved in the accreditation process and be our first success story for a native finance institution in the region being accredited to the GCF. I can tell you that there are quite a number of persons from the region who are operating inside and outside the space that are desperate to see entities such as Republic Bank, be accredited. So Ray, you do have quite quite a load on your shoulder, but we're going to be here to help guide in the discussions, and hopefully hopefully you and team will accept, and we'll move forward from there. So the GCF is open. We're happy to talk with the private sector. We're not just a government relations entity. We have, we want to get climate finance out there for developing countries. SIDS in the Caribbean are very important, and the space is one that is very important to the GCF. So please do engage with us, and let's see how we can take the conversation forward.
Absolutely.
All right, Ray.
Yeah, well, Orville, we have a string of firsts within the last couple of months, so hopefully there'll be some more good news to announce. So I look forward to having that discussion with you, and to Wendy and the CAB team. I just again want to applaud you guys for this forum. I hope that we can continue this conversation to really encourage a lot more of the members of CAB to really look at this space and really make the necessary steps to become signatories to some of these global commitments. I do think that we will have strength in numbers to really elevate our region's issues at the global level in terms of a lot of policies that are being discussed and being set. So I look forward to the next iteration of this, and reach out to us if you guys need any more insight on any aspect of our process as we go through this.
All right, gentlemen, thank you again so much. Certainly your closing remarks are on point. I think that it is very encouraging to see that we are beginning to have very, very meaningful conversations. This is certainly not the end. We are planning now with our CEO forum coming up at the end of this month, the 24th and 25th. And I believe, Ray, that you should definitely make the arrangements to be there as we continue to air this. I think there will be a lot more questions and opportunities to network around it. Although before we go, we did speak about accreditation, and I think that may be the next opportunity for us to get people to understand exactly what that process is going to look like. And so perhaps a roadmap to accreditation for sustainable and viable financing is the way to go. And like everything else, CAB is here to support and to continue to have these very important dialogues for our members and bringing light to matters that are certainly impactful and where we can get most critically involved in spearheading these initiatives. We certainly would want to support you there as well. So again, as we wrap up this morning, I want to say thank you. Orville, I don't know if the sun is up or the moon is out. I'm not sure what's happening in your side of the world right now, but whatever it is, make the most of today. Ray, I give some hours back to you. Thank you again.
No problem.
Thank you, Wendy.
Absolutely. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.